China's job losses and the weekend trade deal. Hey everyone, it's Wolfgang. So in Switzerland, over the past couple of days, this is Sunday night, the United States and China have been meeting in Switzerland to address the $295 billion trade deficit that the U.S. is suffering with China. China has a $295 billion trade surplus. They are selling $295 billion more to the U.S. than the U.S. is selling to China. So just to let you know, in balanced trade, an equal amount of goods would cross the borders of the countries. In other words, there wouldn't be a deficit, there wouldn't be a surplus. China would sell X dollars to the United States. The United States would sell the same X dollars of products to China. So that's not happening. The reason this weekend trade deal, this trade meeting was arranged was because trade is imbalanced. That China is selling a lot more into the U.S. market than the U.S. is being able to sell into China's market. So this weekend's U.S.-China trade meeting was in Switzerland. Were there any changes announced to China-U.S. supply chains? Because the supply chains have been used by large retailers like Walmart and Target and Costco. A lot of those products were coming from China and make up the trade deficit that the U.S. is suffering. So at the end of this meeting, the 145% tariff on China has not changed. The 125% tariff on the U.S. that China has also has not changed. So all those are still in place. Both of those tariffs are still in place. So in other words, the U.S. is saying, look, we do not have balanced trade. We are buying much more from you than you're buying from us, and that is eliminating jobs in our country, manufacturing jobs. And China's position is, well, if you're going to put a tariff on us, we'll put a tariff on you. That's basically how we got to needing this weekend trade meeting. So at the end of this meeting, who gave up what? Because what you're hearing is that progress has been made. The U.S. has given up nothing, okay? The 145% tariff on China has not changed. There was no formal written agreement, announcement that the U.S. is altering its 145% tariff. There was a mention that it could change, something like 80%, from 145% to 80%. But that's just a could. There's nothing in writing, there's nothing in the agreement that says the U.S. will drop its tariff to 80%. So maybe we could, right? That was the U.S., that was the outcome of this weekend's meeting. And China, likewise, has made no announcement that they decided to lower the 125% tariff they put on the U.S., okay? So what was accomplished? Here's what was accomplished. This is the big takeaway. A new hotline that the U.S. can use to complain to China. It's a consultation mechanism, is what they're calling it. This consultation mechanism was spelled out in the trade deal, and the consultation mechanism is a way for the U.S. to lodge complaints if it feels like it's being treated unfairly. China will never use that consultation mechanism because they have a trade surplus. They're selling $300 billion more to us than we are to them. So China's not going to use the hotline. The U.S. could use the hotline. But what is the end result of this hotline, this consultation mechanism? Not much. You know, because what would China do if the U.S. says you're still selling $300 billion more into our country? What would China do? Probably not much based on past behavior. So here's the main problem, okay? Here's the main problem. China has had a goal for a long time to use cheap labor and slave labor to eliminate manufacturing in the West, and it has been succeeding. You've heard the phrase hollowed out, that the U.S. manufacturing sector has been hollowed out, and all those jobs have gone offshore. Okay, China has been using cheap labor and slave labor to make that happen. China has been trying to eliminate manufacturing capacity in Western countries. Their thinking is that if we can eliminate, if we can impoverish Western countries, they will become weaker and less of a threat to us. Okay, so that's a rational move if you're a predator country. Okay, if you're a predator country and you want to weaken your perceived enemies, then this would be a good strategy. Let's use artificially cheap labor and weaken Western countries. It has worked. Okay, a lot of manufacturing has vanished from the U.S., vanished from from Europe, vanished from the U.K. So they won't change this to kowtow to the U.S. So China's main problem is they have this goal, they've been implementing it successfully, and they're not going to change this to kowtow to the West. They're not going to be in a position where, oh, the West told us we must take this action. Okay, so we have to take this action. They're not going to do that because voluntarily stopping this behavior, the flood of artificially cheap goods, makes them appear weak, and they don't want that. So China really does not have any incentive. You know, when you're winning at something and you're getting complaints from the losing side, are you going to listen to the losing side? No, you're going to try to keep on winning. That's human nature. Human nature, the same thing is going on between Russia and Ukraine. People think that Russia, it's winning territory, and it's got Crimea, it's got a large portion of the eastern part of Ukraine. So Russia is winning. When a winner hears complaints from the loser, you know, they don't have to respond to that because they're the winner. They're making gains. Why would they want to stop winning, right? It's the same with China. They're not going to voluntarily stop the flood of artificially cheap goods, cheap labor and slave labor produced goods. They're not going to voluntarily give that up. They have no reason to. They're winning. They have a trade surplus with the U.S. They're selling 300 billion more to the U.S. than we are to them. There is no way China is going to sit there and say, oh, the losing side is complaining, we better stop winning, right? It's not going to happen, okay? It's not happening. So if you study this trade deal, there are some unexplained hows. You know, how's this going to work in this deal? For example, the 295 billion trade deficit, it says it will be addressed, okay? So the deal says that this huge trade imbalance will be addressed. It doesn't say how. There's no explanation of how that's going to be addressed. Because here's the way it would have to be addressed. China would have to say, we will buy from this day forward an equal amount of goods from the U.S. that we sell to the U.S. That's the way to make it happen. China would have to come out and say, the how would be China saying, we are going to buy 295 billion of U.S., additional 295 billion of U.S. goods from this day forward, so that we're no longer winning, so that we lose our trade surplus. They're not going to do that. Okay, they didn't do that. There's nothing in the agreement that explains how this trade deficit will be addressed. China's the winning party. The U.S. is complaining about it. China's not going to want to stop winning. They like that trade surplus. They're not going to kowtow to the U.S. It's just human nature. It's the same with Russia and Ukraine. Russia is never going to stop as long as they are winning. They're not going to stop. Okay. So that's just human nature. It's very predictable. So here's what Scott Bessent said, okay, at the conclusion of the meeting. He said, there will be a consultation mechanism for ongoing discussions on trade issues. That's the hotline. That's this hotline, right? The hotline. That's the losing side, the U.S. calling and complaining, hey, we're still losing. China will say, we're still winning. End of story. You know, that's it. So Scott Bessent said there's a new consultation mechanism for ongoing discussions of trade issues. Okay? It's meaningless. It's not going to change anything. And then he also admitted there has been no real progress. He said, this is only a starting point for de-escalation, normal trade relations. That means an elimination of the trade surplus China has. That means an elimination of China winning over the U.S. Bessent said that will take 2 to 3 years to correct. It will take 2 to 3 years to correct if China agreed to it. They haven't agreed to it. China is not going to voluntarily stop winning. Okay? It's not going to happen. So when you are a losing party, the U.S. has got a trade deficit with China. When you're the losing party and the winning party is unreasonable and they do not want to stop winning, the only thing you can do is maintain the blockade. You can put up if you have a barrier that you can put up to put an end to the trade imbalance, you have to use it. That's the only tool in the toolbox. That's what the U.S. is going to do. That is why the U.S. said nothing about changing that 145%. The U.S. is not going to change that tariff. And likewise, China will not change their 125% tariff. So in other words, what I'm saying is China's going to suffer massive job losses. The title of this video, China job losses. Okay, so what are the job losses looking like for China? About 16 million workers in China immediately affected by the U.S. tariff, the 145% tariff. The tariff's not going away. The U.S. is losing. They've reached out to China with the weekend meeting. China did not agree to a trade balance. China did not say, okay, we understand we are winning by $300 billion a year over the U.S. We agree to make it balanced. We will agree to buy $300 billion of goods from the U.S. so that everything's even Steven. China did not do that. So the U.S. will maintain this block. It's the only tool the U.S. has. China's going to lose about 16 million jobs immediately. They've already, they're already having problems in their factories because the orders. Because the problem is this: when Chinese cargo ships show up at ports, as soon as they're offloaded, the tariffs are imposed. And so right now, cargo ships from China are sitting at the docks and they're not unloading because nobody wants to pay the tariffs, right? Nobody wants to. All of a sudden, we ordered something for $1 and now it's $2.45. Or we ordered $10 million worth of stuff. Now it's about $250 million. They're not going to agree to offload the ships. That's not going to happen. So how can China avoid these job losses? Okay, so they're in a pickle because the U.S. is not going to tolerate being a loser in trade. The U.S. simply wants fair, balanced trade. Balanced trade. They want a trade balance, not a trade deficit. Okay, so the U.S. is not going to stop using the only tool it has. That's basically an embargo on Chinese products. Nobody's going to pay those tariffs. How can China avoid these huge job losses? Here's how. This would be the recommendation for China. China supports Iran, North Korea, and Russia. China is going to have to take its products and dump them into those countries. China is going to have to dump artificially cheap products into Russia, into Iran, and into North Korea, right? That's the only option it has because the U.S. is not going to change this tariff. So basically, the wrap up, you probably figured out by now, is it's always nice in a meeting a meeting between two countries to try to come away with positive news. It's sort of a face saving for both sides. We did make some progress. These things are the big things. These are the big details. Only if those tariff numbers changed could you say there was progress. And they have not changed. And they will not change this week. Even though the U.S. said we could drop the 145% to 80%, I doubt seriously the U.S. is going to act on that, okay? Because Besant himself said it's going to take 2 to 3 years. It's going to take 2 to 3 years before a trade balance could be achieved. And that is assuming China agrees to that, and they haven't. They're winning. Why would they agree to that? They're not going to want to stop winning. The same with Russia. Russia does not want to stop winning. That war is not going to stop. That's just human nature. Unfortunately, I was pretty hopeful that these numbers would change. My hope for the meeting was at the end of this meeting, the two parties would come out and say, number one, we recognize there's a large trade imbalance and it's causing problems in U.S.-China relations. We fully get that. And number two, we're going to fix that. And here's how we're going to fix it. We, China, are going to start buying $300 billion in additional products from the U.S. so the trade becomes balanced. That was my hope. It didn't happen. It's not going to happen. Besant said it would take 2 to 3 years to get back to normal trade, to balanced trade. That would require China agreeing to no longer be the winner. Okay, they're not going to do that. So you will hear this the coming week as people analyze the deal, because it was just announced today. We started looking at it and we said, there's nothing here. These numbers didn't change. China's winning. They're not going to want to stop winning. That's human nature. Watch the news this week as analysts start picking apart this trade deal, so-called deal, and you will see exactly what I'm saying here, that nothing has changed. The tariffs remain in place because China will not stop using cheap labor and slave labor. They do not want to be seen as kowtowing, as being subordinate to the U.S. demands. That's just not in their makeup. They're basically kind of a spoiled child. I want to do this, and I don't care if you don't like it. I want to keep doing it, right? Russia's doing the same thing against Ukraine right now, unfortunately. So if you have any questions about this, please post in the comments. I'll try to get to those. I really want to thank everyone for watching, and have a great day.